Alright, welcome back to part 2 of the Hail Caesar series. Going to be diving into the actual deck list today, looking at the creatures and legendary creatures that are part of this deck. And then in the next video, we'll be looking at the other non-land permanents. But we'll jump right into these creatures in just a second. Okay, really quickly, we're going to go over the commander again. Caesar Legion's Emperor is a 4-cost black, white, red. 4/4 legendary human soldier. Whenever you attack, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, choose 2. Sacrifice 2 1/1 red and white soldier creature tokens with haste that are tapped and attacking. You may draw a card and lose 1 life. And Caesar Legion's Emperor deals damage equal to the number of creature tokens you control to target opponent. One thing that I didn't mention in the overview that I meant to, but I forgot, is that it does not on here specify that you can only choose each option once. So you can choose the same option multiple times. It does not specify that you cannot do so in either the card or the rule text and rulings. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're playing, give you a little bit more utility and usefulness in there. And moving to our first card, we have Desdemona, Freedom's Edge, a white-red 4-cost, 3/4 human creature with Vigilance. Whenever Desdemona, Freedom's Edge attacks, there's that attack trigger again. Target creature card in your graveyard that is an artifact or has mana value 3 or less gains escape until end of turn. The escape cost is equal to its mana cost plus exile 2 other cards from your graveyard. So escape is essentially you can cast it from your graveyard. And important thing to note, target creature card in your graveyard that is an artifact. So if it's a artifact creature, it doesn't matter what its converted mana cost is. It just can gain escape. And the escape cost is what you have to pay in order to cast it from your graveyard. So in this case, it's listed casting cost and exiling 2 other cards from your graveyard. It doesn't even specify that the other cards that you exile have to be creatures. You just exile 2 other cards from your graveyard and pay its mana cost, and you can drop it onto the battlefield. So it's either an artifact creature or a creature that has a converted mana cost 3 or less. So either one, good utility, gives you some graveyard, especially synergy with here since you're sacrificing other creatures. If you don't have a token to sacrifice or whatever, you can sacrifice one of your main creatures and use Desdemona to bring that creature back. Focuses on attack trigger with the graveyard return. Great combo together. Absolutely love having that card in this deck. Next creature that we're going into is Eddie Lonesome Eyebot. It's a 3-cost 2/1 flying legendary artifact creature with the ability whenever you attack, there's that attack trigger. If the number of attacking creatures is greater than the number of quest counters on Eddie, put a quest counter on it. So if you attack with 1 creature, you put a quest counter on him. And then on your next turn, if you attack with 2 creatures, you would put a quest counter on him. But then on the next turn, if you were to attack with 2 creatures again, you wouldn't put a 1/1 counter on him. A quest counter on him. Just because that's only triggers if it's more creatures that are attacking than quest counters on Eddie. The other thing about this one is notice that it's whenever you attack. It's not whenever Eddie attacks. So, like Caesar, you can leave him in the background and attack with all of your other creatures without risking him and just build up those quest counters. So, he has a secondary ability. pay 2, sacrifice Eddie, draw a card, and then draw an additional card for each quest counter on Eddie. Great card draw utility, has the attack triggers on there, and allows him to be sacrificed. Plays pretty darn well in with the themes that this deck is rolling with here. Next card is Butch Delora Tunnel Snake. Is a 2-cost 2/2 legendary human rogue. Notice lots of humans. He has menace, so he can't be blocked except for by 2 or more creatures. He cannot be blocked by a single creature. Whenever he attacks, he gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other rogue and or snake you control. So there are a number of other rogues in this deck, but not as many rogues as there are humans. And there are very little snakes in this deck, if any. None are particularly coming to mind, but we'll find that out as we go forward. So he's a solid tribal creature for rogues and snakes, which doesn't really hit with Caesar, but secondary ability is a 2-cost, put a menace counter on another target creature. It becomes a rogue in addition to its other types. Okay, so that is where his ability comes from and why he can kind of work in this deck. It's his ability to reclassify other creatures as rogues, and when he does, he gets +1/+1 for each other rogue that you control, and gives other creatures you control menace. Not terrible. Not terrible, because the 2-cost, give target creature a menace counter, and then that creature becomes a rogue, so it's buffing himself and making it harder for your opponents to block you. It's a solid option there. And also runs on the attack trigger as well, which is good with synergy. Overall, it's decent. McCready Lamplight Mayors, a white-black 2-cost 1/3 legendary human. Again, advisor. Whenever a creature you control with power 2 or less attacks, it gains Skulk until end of turn. So Skulk it cannot be blocked by a creature with greater power. A lot of the creatures in this deck are low to the ground as far as attack power goes. So this will basically make them much difficult to block. But whenever a creature with power 4 or greater attacks you, its controller loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So whenever you're attacked with a large creature, you gain, your opponents lose. Whenever you attack with a creature 2 or less, it gains Skulk. Very good utility. It's only a 2-cost. Synergizes really, really solidly, in my opinion. Elder Arthur Maxon is a white-black 3-cost 4/2. Creature tokens you control have training. Now, we already went over the fact that this deck produces a solid number of tokens. And training is whenever a creature token you control attacks with another creature with a greater power, you put a 1/1 counter on that token. So there's some of your 1/1 counter abilities that we were looking at on the spreadsheet. Adds buffs to tokens, and sacrifice another creature, Elder Arthur Maxon gains indestructible until end of turn. So he'll protect himself, buff your other tokens, and also start allowing you to put some 1/1 counters and making these creatures a little bit bigger. So great pick for the deck. Sierra Nuka's Biggest Fan is a 4-cost 3/4 human. Again, whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, put a quest counter on Sierra Nuka's Biggest Fan and create a food token. So food tokens are similar to clue tokens or treasure tokens. They're an artifact token that you create, and allows you to pay 2 colorless and sacrifice it in order to gain 3 life. So Situational. This deck doesn't really focus on life gain or artifact sack. It focuses more on creature sack. But we'll bear with it, see what happens. Whenever you sacrifice a food, target creature you control gains +X until end of turn, where X is the number of quest counters on Sierra. So whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you put a quest counter on her, and then create a food token. And then whenever you sacrifice that food token, target creature you control gets +X until end of turn. X is equal to the number. Okay. So overall, life gain feeding into buffing your creatures. Not a bad card. Maybe not the best pick for Caesar, especially since it's whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage rather than attack. If it was more of an attack trigger, I would see it having a little bit more place here. But overall, it's a decent card. Kellogg Dangerous Mind is a black-red 3-cost, 3/2 legendary human mercenary with first strike and haste. So get some first strike in there. That's always helpful. Whenever Kellogg Dangerous Mind attacks, create a treasure token. So there you get your attack trigger. Also feeding into ramp, so you kind of got a double combo there. That's always wonderful. But he also has a secondary ability, sacrifice 5 treasures to gain control of target creature for as long as you control Kellogg. Activate only as a sorcery. So not only does he contribute to your overall ramp, but he can also turn that ramp. If you don't end up needing it, you can save it up, and you can flip that ramp into gaining control of creatures that your opponents control. So very good utility, absolutely wonderful. Mr. House, President and CEO, red, white, black, 3-cost, 0/4. Whenever you roll a 4 or higher, create a 3/3 colorless robot artifact creature token. If you rolled a 6 or higher, instead create that token and a treasure token. So, not 100% sure, but I don't think that there's a lot of instances of rolling a dice in this. But we will go ahead and continue plugging through, but I don't remember very many instances of roll a dice, except for this card. But he also has pay 4 and tap to roll a 6-sided die, plus an additional 6-sided die for each mana from treasures spent to activate this ability. Okay, so he will generate tokens and treasure tokens, creature tokens and treasure tokens. And then when you sacrifice a number of cards, or a number of... You can... Sorry. Starting that one over. He will also, if you roll a 6 or higher on a die, create a treasure token. When you use mana from treasure tokens to use this secondary ability, you can end up rolling a whole bunch of die. Now, we already saw that Kellogg will create treasure tokens. Mr. House will create treasure tokens, but he mostly focuses on die rolling. And so if you were to take him out of Caesars and put him in a deck that is more specialized in like rolling d20s or things like the D&D or Baldur's Gate expansions, I feel like he would be a lot more efficient. And he doesn't really synergize with those attack triggers. While he does kind of create tokens when you roll die, not super overall reliable in this deck. Yes Man, Personal Security Tron is a 3-cost white 2/2. Tap it. Target opponent gains control of Yes Man, Personal Security Tron. When they do, you may draw 2 cards and put a quest counter on Yes Man. Activate only during your turn. So, tap, draw 2 cards, give it to your opponent. On their turn, they can tap, draw 2 cards, give it to one of their opponents, so on and so forth. When Yes Man leaves the battlefield, its owner, so not its current controller, but you, as the player of this deck, create a tapped 1/1 white soldier creature token for each quest counter on it. So as your opponents utilize this card draw, and you utilize it once, and the more that they use it, when it dies, you'll end up flooding your board state with a whole bunch of creatures, unless they can manage to kill it early, which isn't particularly difficult, but it's an extra thing to think about because they're going to want the card draw. Or do they want the card draw, or do they want to limit your board state? So that can always be fun to see what they do with there. Paladin Elizabeth Taggarty is a 3-cost white-red 3/2 with Battalion. Whenever Paladin Elizabeth Taggarty and at least 2 other creatures attack, draw a card. Then you may put a creature card with converted mana value X or less from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, where X is Paladin Elizabeth Taggarty's power. So we do have some 1/1 counters in this deck, so we can buff Elizabeth's power up. And so it's not just converted mana cost 3, it's converted mana cost X or less, and it gives you card draw. This card can be phenomenal in a deck with lots of higher costs, especially if that deck revolves around 1/1 counters or other group buffs that will cause her power to be much more substantial. And she also can be used to buff your board state. So if you're using Caesar, right, and you can get a bunch of card draw, she will also give you a little bit of card draw, but you can use her to help put those cards from your hand onto the battlefield. And is a attack trigger, does count as an attack trigger only if she's attacking with 2 or more other creatures as well. For a 3-cost, absolutely wonderful. Rose Cutthroat Raiders, a 4-cost red 3/2 with first strike. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you attacked this turn, create a junk token for each opponent you attacked. At the end of combat, not the beginning, my bad. At the end of combat on your turn, if you attack this turn, create a junk token for each opponent you attacked. When you sacrifice a junk, add red. So she gives you some mana ramp in the sacrifice a junk, add red. And you create a junk token for each opponent that you attacked. So in 1v1, not going to get too much mileage out of her. In multiplayer games, she can be a lot more beneficial. Solid. Definitely solid if you're playing in a multiplayer game. If you want your deck to be kind of hybrid and be able to go effectively in 1v1 and in multiplayer games, I might consider replacing her with something else. But that, again, depends on the deck context. In this particular deck, I would probably pull her out. Colonel Autumn is a black-white 3-cost, 2/3 legendary, again, human. Lots of legendary humans. With lifelink and exploit. So when this creature enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. So we got a little bit more of those aristocrats going on. Other legendary creatures you control have exploit. Okay. So now whenever another legendary creature you control enters the battlefield under your control, you may sacrifice a creature. Whenever a creature you control exploits a creature, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. So you can cast a legendary creature, sacrifice one of your tokens, and put a 1/1 counter on all of your creatures. Essentially is what that is allowing you to do. Very good utility, allows you to get those 1/1 counters on other creatures like Elizabeth. Builds them up. There is a solid, as you can see, number of these legendary creatures in this deck. So definitely a worthwhile and worthy addition to this scenario, or to this deck here. Legate Lanius, Caesar's Ace. We got a red-black 4-cost 2/2. Whenever he enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a 10th of the creatures they control, rounded up. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a creature, put a 1/1 counter on him. So this deck doesn't really force your opponent to sacrifice creatures very much. It does a little bit, but not a whole lot. And for a 4-cost that doesn't help you with attack triggers and doesn't help you with destroying target creatures or anything like that, the only real deck synergy that this thing has is putting 1/1 counters on itself. So I would probably pull him out. Solid overall card, but not really what we're probably going to want in this deck in particular. Aradesh the Founder is a 3-cost white 1/4 with Enlist, which means as this creature attacks, there's your attack trigger, you may untap a non-attacking creature you control without summoning Sickness. When you do, add its power to this creature's power until end of turn. Okay. Interesting. So tap a non-attacking. So you could not swing with Caesar, swing with Aradesh, and then tap Caesar to give Aradesh +4/+4. So that's solid. Whenever a creature you control attacks, if it enlisted a creature this combat, the creature that attacked gains double strike until end of turn. If that creature's power is 4 or greater, draw a card. Okay. So most of the creatures in this deck, if not all of them other than Aradesh, do not have Enlist. So that basically focuses specifically on this card. And when it attacks, if it ends up having power 4 or greater, you get to draw a card. And it gains double strike whenever it attacks. Whenever you tap, not whenever it attacks, whenever you tap a creature to use its Enlist ability, like I was just saying. Craig Boone Novak Guard is a 3-cost white red 3/3 with Reach and Lifelink. Okay, Lifelink is always helpful. So is Reach. Whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, there's your attack trigger. Put 2 quest counters on Craig Boone. When you do, Craig Boone deals damage equal to the number of quest counters on it and up to 1 target creature, unless that creature's controller has Craig Boone deal that damage to themselves. So basically, when you attack with 2 or more creatures, it doesn't say that he has to be attacking. He's another one that you can keep in the back. You put 2 quest counters on him, and then he deals damage equal to the number of quest counters on him at that point to target creature. The opponent can then choose choose to mitigate that damage by having that damage be dealt to them instead of that creature. Good for control, good for also allowing taking your opponent's life down if you target something that is particularly valuable to them. Overall, really good card for a 3-cost. Overseer of Vault 76. We got a 3-cost white 3/3. Another legendary human. Go figure that. When it or another creature with power 3 or less enters the battlefield under your control, put a quest counter on Overseer of Vault 76. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may remove 3 quest counters from among permanents you control. When you do, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control, and they gain vigilance until end of turn. Kind of a mouthful. There are, as you've seen, a whole bunch of cards in here that are quest counters, quest counters, quest counters, quest counters, right? Well, this Overseer allows you to utilize those quest counters and turn it into mass 1/1 counters. One of the downsides of this card, though, is that aside from 1/1 counters, it has very little synergy with the deck. And 1/1 counters in and of themselves don't even really synergize with the commander of the deck. Like 1/1 counters don't really do anything for Caesar outside of 1/1 counters. Caesar can't really do anything with that. Very good card. We do have enough quest counters in this deck for a quest counter utility card to be worth it. But that's something to keep in mind for if you look at rebuilding this deck or doing other things with it. If you remove those quest counter cards, I would think about considering pulling this one also. Still, very good card. All right, those are the legendary creatures. Every single one of them except for 2 are humans. that's worth noting. Again, we got the human tribals going on a little bit here. But in the non-humans, we have the non-legendaries. Mysterious Stranger is a 4-cost 3/2 human with flash. Whenever it enters the battlefield, for each graveyard with an instant or sorcery card in it, exile target instant or sorcery card from that graveyard. If 2 or more cards are exiled this way, you choose one of them at random and copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. More effective when you have multiple players going on. Because the more players you have, the more likely you are to be able to exile that many instants or sorceries in order to be able to trigger this ability here. So 4-cost 3/2 flash casts a random instant or sorcery card from a graveyard. I feel like you could probably do better. It does not synergize with attack triggers, token drops, or dealing direct damage really. And this deck doesn't rely in and of itself on the casting of its sorceries. I would consider pulling that one out, but overall a good card if you're running something like Kess. Keeper of the Cord is a 4-cost 3/4 at the beginning of white, at the beginning of human. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player controls more creatures than you, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. The likelihood that that happens with this deck is there, but it's not super prevalent unless you're playing against a mass token deck. This deck definitely produces a bunch of tokens, but like if you're playing against like a white-green deck or whatever that can build like insanely wide when you're dealing with like hundreds and hundreds of token creatures, this will probably help you, definitely. The most tokens that I saw with this deck was I had about 12. So if you're playing against anybody that is rolling more than 12, or if your deck is getting off to a slow start, that can be definitely helpful, give you a little bit of extra token gen. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player controls more lands than you, you may search your library for a basic Plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. This deck only has, there they are, 5 Plains cards in it. And once all of those Plains are on the battlefield, then that ability becomes null because you don't have any more Plains to pull. I feel like this card would be so much more effective in a monocolored or maybe a dual colored deck, because you'll have a higher concentration of Plains cards, and not only that, but mostly that. This card does not have anything to do with attack triggers. It does have to do with token gen, but it's situational token generation. It does have a degree of land ramp, but it's questionable land ramp because if you draw into a Plains or start with it in your hand or whatever the case is, you're not going to have a whole lot of Plains to end up pulling from. So it'll be a limited use as far as the land ramp goes. I feel like you could probably do a lot better than that in this deck because it doesn't really synergize with our basic attack triggers. But that's just my opinion. Very good card in other circumstances, but in this one, maybe not so much. Morbid Opportunist, we got a 3-cost 1/3 human again. Whenever one or more other creatures die, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So whenever something dies for the first time on a turn, card draw. Low cost, low to the ground. Doesn't really synergize with Caesar too much, but it's not supposed to because it's there for the card draw, which is essential in just about every single deck that you're ever going to build. Good card. I really enjoy that one. Ruthless Rad is a 3-cost 2/2 with Squad. exile 4 cards from your graveyard. So what squad is as an additional cost to cast the spell, you may pay its squad cost any number of times. When this creature enters the battlefield, create that many tokens that are copies of it. And it is a 2/2 menace. Okay, so you can weaponize your graveyard with this to mass produce 2/2 menace creatures. That's not bad. That's not bad. Menace can be really useful, especially if you have mass menace, because then it makes it really difficult for your opponents to block everything that you're throwing against them. Exiling 4 cards from your graveyard. This deck doesn't really do a whole lot with milling. So I think, I don't know, situationally, solid card to have in here. Thrill Kill Disciple is a 3-cost 3/2 red human, again, with squad of 1 colorless and discard a card. Its ability is when it dies, create a junk token. So you can sacrifice this to Caesar, and then you get a junk token. So that's, I don't know, I feel like we could do a whole lot better. A junk token is essentially an artifact that you can tap, or that you can sacrifice it to exile the top card of your library, and you may cast it this turn. And if it's a card that you don't have the mana cost for, but you needed, then it's just gone. So, junk tokens can be okay. They can also hurt you. It really depends on how you use it and what you hit with them. I feel like you could probably do a lot better than Thrill Kill Disciple, in my opinion. Gary Clone is a white 2-cost 1/3 with squad 2 colorless. So pay 2 colorless any number of times and you create that many copies of Gary Clone. When Gary Clone attacks, there's an attack trigger. That's good. Each other creature you control named Gary Clone gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So if you have about 6 of them, then they all attack. Each creature you control named Gary Clone gets +1/+1 for each creature you control named Gary Clone, because that each of them are going to have this ability and they're going to stack on top of each other. So if he has 6 Gary Clones, then that would be, those Gary Clones would get +32/0. So yeah, +32/0. My math might be wrong, but you get the idea. That builds very, very quickly if you end up creating that many Gary Clones, which with a squad of 2 might not be super feasible, but it depends on how your land ramp goes. Overall, very decent card in the right deck. In this deck, it has your attacking trigger. I would say it definitely has a place. Captain of the Watch is a 6-cost 3/3 with vigilance. Other soldier creatures you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance. So you're creating soldier tokens. Your commander's a soldier. There's a soldier. You got a bunch of soldiers in your other legendaries. There are an amount of non-soldiers, but the presence of soldiers in the deck is overall fairly reliable, and gives them vigilance and +1/+1. When Captain of the Watch enters the battlefield, create 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens, which end up being 2/2s with vigilance because of Captain of the Watch's ability. A bit high on the mana cost for my taste for what it does, especially with the not incomplete concentration of soldiers in this deck, but not terrible speaking generally. White Glove Gourmand is a 4-cost white-black 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens. So there's more soldiers. There's some token gen just on entering the battlefield. That's good. At the beginning of your end step, if another human died under your control this turn, create a food token. So the food token, remember, the pay 2, sacrifice the food token to gain 3 life. There are a lot of humans in this deck, so that gives you a little bit of life gain utility on the side if you want to use it. And it If another human died under your control this turn, you can make that happen with Caesar. There's enough of a synergy there that if you feel like having the food token life gen combo is worth it to you to include, then absolutely go for it. But I feel like if you don't feel like that, I would pull it from the deck because creating 2/1/1 white human soldier creature tokens for 4 mana, there are cards that are so much more efficient than that. That'll accomplish that. Wasteland Raider is a 4-cost black 4/3 with squad of 2 colorless. We already went over squad. There's 2 colorless right there. When it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. So with squad, as more of these are entering the battlefield, each player is going to sacrifice more creatures. That can be useful if you have enough mana to turn it into a pseudo board wipe. Depending on what your opponent's board state is, it isn't a true board wipe. Because if you're fighting against mass tokens, then that'll be nothing. So situationally good. I think you can do a little bit better for control cards, but that's just me. Pitiless Plunderer is a 4-cost 1/4 black. Whenever another creature you control dies, create a treasure token. That takes your sacrifice aristocrats and converts it into mana ramp. Absolutely solid card. Impassioned Orator is a 2-cost 2/2. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. So creatures entering, you got a bunch of token gen here. So you are having creatures enter the battlefield, and so you'll be gaining life. For a 2-cost, that's a good supplemental there. Here's a very key card in this deck. General's Enforcer is a white-black 2-cost 2/3. Legendary humans you control have indestructible. Remember, I was going to legendary human, legendary human, legendary human, legendary human, over and over and over again. Well, legendary humans you control have indestructible. It's a 2-cost creature. Just outright, there it is. That's pretty fire, in my opinion. And it also has a secondary ability of pay 4, exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So you get a little bit of token generation and great protection for your legendary humans, of which you have a great amount of in this deck. Very solid card. Securitron Squadron is a 2-cost squad 3. It's a white. There we go. It's a white 2/2. Whenever a creature token enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on it. So these enter the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it, so they become 2/2s. And if you pay the squad cost, there are tokens that are entering as a copy of it, and so the more tokens you have that are a copy of it, those are entering with 1/1 counters on it. And then, because this creature enters the battlefield, and then you create those tokens, so those creatures are coming in with 1/1 counters, and then they stack on top of each other, so that whenever these come out, say you do squad, you pay squad 3 times, so you have a total of 4 of these, then all of these are coming out with 4 1/1 counters on it, and so they're just large, easy to mass produce, and you just end up having a lot of solidly large creatures rolling at you. So, very good card. Lots of synergy, lots of buffing. They work really well together. Next, we got a 3-cost black-red Boneyard Scrapper. Look at that. It's another human. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you lose 1 life and create a junk token. So here, there's the explanation of junk tokens. Tap, sacrifice this artifact, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So that's interesting. Whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on this card. So whenever you sacrifice a token to this, notice that treasures are tokens, food are tokens, these junks are tokens, and all of them involve being sacrificed. So whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield, you put a 1/1 counter on this guy. He can build up pretty darn quick using that. So that's pretty darn good. And the final creature of this deck is the Powder Ganger, which is a 3-cost 2/2 Squad 2. When it enters the battlefield, destroy up to one target artifact. So you can squad him up, destroy a bunch of other artifacts. Good for board state control, creature control, provided you have the mana ramp on that. Doesn't really synergize too awful much with Caesar, but overall is still a really good card for taking care of your opponent's board state. So those are the creatures of the Hail Caesar Precon deck. That was 32 different cards that we kind of went over there. In the next video, we're going to go move on to doing the instance, sorceries, artifacts, and enchantments. Probably be a little bit of a shorter video. And then after that, we'll go into the lands. But thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.